Go ahead.
Your name is Merrill Williams.
Yeah, my name is Merrill
You are
Williams.
the first person to blow the whistle on
Eh,
big tobacco.
yeah, yeah,
You were working for a law firm in reading, writing, cataloging secret
right,
documents. You also are considered a pariah by many.
absolutely. Yeah.
Tell me, tell me exactly what you did.
Well,
What did you do?
the the most important thing I think was to other people what I did is that I was sitting in a room and I collected documents, and from various sources I did this for 4.25 years, and then I had a lawsuit. And I actually was proposing to settle a lawsuit with my lawyer in Louisville, Kentucky, who is probably the only decent lawyer that I know, and that would be J. Fox DeMoisi, a brilliant man, and I we got into a personal injury lawsuit, and after that, we were snowed. We were absolutely. There were too many cowards out there. There were so many cowards out there. I can't name them, but they were. They went all the way up to the top, even to the honorable one, the chairman of the consumer, Ralph Nader. And maybe he didn't know it at the time, but certainly his assistant at litigation group knew it because he turned his back on me, and the only person that was slightly interested was Morton Mintz, and I remember him well as being a man who, well, he couldn't afford to lose everything he had, so he had to drop out. Otherwise, I would think he would have had the balls to go ahead. Now, I can't give any credit to anybody except um, to that first initial contact with Fox DeMoisi, and then after that, there were so many rulings and so much devastation in terms of what happened in the courtroom in Judge Thomas Wine, and what happened in this appellate court in Kentucky, and what happened in the Supreme Court in Kentucky. All the things that you always know if you're home cooking something, and thank you to Dick Scruggs for that particular meritorious piece of memorabilia. That is a term of endearment to me. But in Kentucky, it was a home cooking of a different kind. They had tobacco, they had racing, and they had booze. And I was involved in tobacco. And from the very beginning, this was an issue that wasn't exactly something that I wanted to do. I virtually changed my life, virtually changed my career, and put myself into complete jeopardy. And I realize that, I know that, and a lot of people don't give a damn, and including myself. But that's over, and I'm here. And 12 years later, I'm looking at a master settlement agreement, which was something that I didn't have anything to do with, not really. And so we start from there. And I've forgotten your question, so can
Why
you?
are you considered a pariah?
I'm a pariah because I was never included in the ball game. I was never included because I was tainted. First of all, when I came down to Mississippi, I was lured. I was lured, literally lured, into the captivity of this group of people, including Mike Moore's little merry band of people who basically were giving me a some respect, and I had been beaten up in Kentucky by all of the good old boys in Kentucky, but then I ran into the good old boys from Ole Miss down here, and essentially I became the pariah. There is something that is extremely interesting to me in that I had buried, or would have in the next few years, my entire family in Mississippi. because that is where my mother was born, not too far from Don Barrett. But I was lured down here. There was no question about it. And I was happy to be lured down here, no question about it. I was practically or impractically, and there's no question about this, I'm bribed by Dick Scruggs in many ways. Uh, I, I can consider the whole matter a, a a very, very, very practiced case in deception in terms of what went on. Dick Scruggs and association with his brother-in-law Trent Lott had a lot to do with what was to happen to me in my life. Now I've spent over 20 years involved in something I never really wanted to get involved in. I did get involved in it, and for that reason, there were these. I think that what you don't understand about what Scruggs and the whole platform, with the exception of Minnesota. Minnesota had gone its own way, and thank God they were different. But what was screen tested here, and what was put into the plan here, was to first make sure that I was isolated, which I accepted just as a mystery, but I was promised a lot of things, including protection, and from the very beginning, and the moment, and some people really think that I gave to Dick Scruggs, I gave to Mike Moore those documents. I didn't. They were put in a vault, and they were meant to be in that vault, and they were meant to be under my control and custody. And I'm going to talk about it in the future. I'm going to talk about my conversation with the Attorney General here in Mississippi in 1994. And that is going to be word for word, because I remembered it. And I remember exactly what the intention of the conversation was. And following that, there is another conversation that goes at the very tail end of the so-called first agreement, and that has to do with a very, at the time, a health writer with USA Today, Doug Levy, and who witnessed the Mike Moore interview, which was an interesting way he was finalizing his statement with me. I was a pariah to all these people for one reason. I was used, and I after a while, I realized, you're captive, and you don't have really any choice. And I had my children, and I had to deal with that. I had custody of my children, and I was not in any position to be anything other than what they wanted me to do. So basically, this was scripted. This whole thing was scripted. I tend to think that Lowell Bergman had his own little path of scripting his movie with Michael Mann, and that's an interesting story in itself. But Dick Scruggs, with his people, including the Castano people, including the people that he knew, and the people that in a really, really very, very good piece by Curtis Wilkie, where he's trying to apologize for Dick Scruggs, but in the end, the apology becomes the fact that the whole mess of these lawyers who all graduated from Ole Miss alienated me for a particular purpose. They couldn't associate with me. I was basically a cadaver to them, and there was nothing but I felt like a sinner down here, and so it was very very lonely while I was here. Now after it was all over and they had their what they wanted, it was still war with the Dick Scruggs people, and it continued to be war with one exception, and that was a really great attorney by the name of Thomas Royals, who was my attorney. But there's nothing you can do to rescue your own fate once you've been involved in it. So I had to deal with two different lawsuits at the same time, and believe me, there was no Mike Moore involved in it, and no Dickie Scruggs involved in it. They were way out of the way. I was left alone, basically. The so-called John Does couldn't be identified. I was a pariah for the reason that I accepted the heat. I protected them. Read my depositions. There's over 60 depositions, I think. Well, I believe that. That it seems like 60 depositions. It might not be that many, but I felt like the protector of the mob, and certainly that is the position that I took, because on the one hand I was protecting my lawsuit and my counterclaim, which by the way I wrote pro se with the assistance of because that was the only way it could be done, with the great attorney, probably the only great attorney that I know, J. Fox DeMoisy in Louisville, Kentucky, and Alan Morrison, with his help from the litigation group, who came in reluctantly, I think, after everybody approved, and yet he did a wonderful job in terms of doing what he does well, consumer advocacy. And to those people, I wasn't a pariah, and I think that to some extent I actually believed that I might have some degree of respectability, which is not really something that I really go after that much. But the attempt to be a real person in all this was just terrible and difficult, and I went through several years of real difficulty, but nothing like what I considered to be what actually came out of this, and this is where I really feel like why I should do this and why I should say this, and that is, you lost it. You blew it. You just completely blew it, and you didn't even ask me questions. When you had won, Mike Moore, even to the point of trying to indoctrinate people with advertising, I came to him through someone who was doing a movie project, and I said, look, I'll be glad to help you. My background, I asked the same thing of Stanton Glantz, and Stanton Glantz, who had by the way had borrowed quite a bit of material that I had, and constructed it very quickly, not to minimize his efforts. I think he's a very sincere guy in many ways. He's full of bull in a lot of ways, but nevertheless, I'm sure he would accept that as being a compliment. On the other hand, there are so many people out there that are really, there's a stream of jealousy and hypocrisy and a lack of goodwill toward anybody who ever did anything, and particularly toward me. I don't care, but I did care at one time, but the one thing that I care about is that you lost the game. You didn't try, and you let people down, and for the purposes of getting a master settlement agreement, somebody, if you could break through the doors and tear them down, but by the way, it's all sealed. You can't get to it. You can't get to the interpretation or to how it was formed. The master settlement agreement was a total failure. And if I'm a pariah, which I am, and I've been that way since the very beginning, I was once to the tobacco companies, and maybe they like me now. I don't know. I don't really care one way or the other how this turns out, but you're going to have another 12 years of the same that you had before. That's it. There's no hope.